Well, good afternoon. I see a lot of people jumping on. I just want to say thank you so much for jumping on to join us for our Ranching 101 program. We've got a great program in front of us here talking about nutrition and soil health and how that impacts your herd. My name is Emily Lochner. I'm with Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association. We've also got Cody Trimble on the team at TSCRA, and then our speaker for this afternoon, Sam Womble. He's an AgriLife Extension agent out of Bexar County, and definitely an expert when it comes to cattle nutrition, stocking rates, and all of the other wonderful things we're going to talk about today. Before we begin, I do want to join in a short message from our sponsor. We're very gracious to our sponsor of the Ranging 101 program, Ag Trust. So we're going to play a quick video on their behalf.
When your passion is agriculture and a rural way of life, you need a partner who understands. That partner is Ag Trust Farm Credit, formed from two trusted farm credit associations. Our mission is to provide personalized financing tailored for full and part-time farmers, ranchers, agribusinesses, and rural homeowners. And because we live in the communities we serve, Ag Trust Farm Credit is here to help you succeed.
Well, thank you to our great friends at Ag Trust. They're here locally in Fort Worth, and we have a great partnership with them. So, for any of your ag financing needs, definitely look them up. At this time, I'm going to let Cody Trimble introduce our speaker for this afternoon.
Yes, thank you everybody for being here. And we're especially appreciative to Sam Womble, County Extension Agent for Ag and Natural Resources in Bexar County. Sam has got a long list of just really great things he's done for the cattle industry and for agriculture in general. Somebody in my time as a county agent that I always looked up to, and somebody that really sets the standard in agri-life for great agricultural programming. We were really excited to be able to grab him. He had some really cool stuff at the Beef Cattle Short Course, and it's got some good programming going on. We think this is going to be really valuable information as you get involved in the cattle industry, and if you want to be more successful and bring forth some long-term sustainability to your program. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sam Womble.
All right. Well, thanks, Cody. I appreciate those comments. And again, appreciate the opportunity to join you all this afternoon. I'm going to kind of try to share my screen here. We're going to see if we can pull up a video here momentarily. Let's see. We had it working here just a minute ago, so we're going to try this again. Okay, I think we've got it here. So yeah, like Cody said, I'm Sam Womble, a county extension agent for Ag and Natural Resources in Bexar County. I've been working for the Extension Service for 29 years now. It's been a great career. What I would like to do this afternoon is share a couple of videos with you. So we're going to do things just a little bit different. There'll still be an opportunity to ask some questions as we wrap up, but I've got two different videos that more or less, I think, do a pretty nice job of highlighting the importance of soil health, water infiltration, talks a little bit about animal performance and nutrition, and then ties economics back into it. Before we get these going, though, I'd like to credit Dr. Megan Clayton. Dr. Clayton is our extension range specialist, and she was really instrumental in helping to narrate, film, and publish these videos. We couldn't have done this without her expertise and her guidance. I'll prelude these videos by telling you that I'm a county agent. I'm not a soil scientist. I'm not a nutritionist or certainly a specialist. I'm just somebody that has always had a particular interest in beef cattle production and really in land stewardship in general. And I've had the privilege of working several different counties over my career. I started out in Erath County in Stephenville. I was in Victoria, in Bandera County, and then currently in Bexar County. And had a lot of good mentors and a lot of folks that I've looked up to over the years that have been real instrumental in helping me personally and professionally. So this first video that we're going to get into, This is some work that we did on a ranch on the south end here in San Antonio and Bexar County, out around Elmendorf, if you're familiar with our part of the state. Marilyn Magaro and her sister Joan manage and operate the Back 40 Ranch. Marilyn actually serves on our uh, beef cattle or ag and natural resource committee here in San Antonio. And what I would say about this family in particular is they're real conscientious of what they do, and they really try to do things correctly. Like many of you guys across the state, our part of Texas has been in an exceptional drought for several years. And so the intent of this first video was to kind of show how trying to defer some grazing and leaving some stubble could positively impact soil health, water infiltration, and forage response. So with that, I'll get this video started.
As the video starts, just a reminder to everybody, if you have questions, drop those in the Q&A box you can see down at the bottom of your screen there, and we will get to all the questions at the end.
Awesome.
We don't have good plant and soil health. We know that we can't capture rainfall when we do finally get some. So in this result demonstration,
Sam, are we supposed to be hearing something on our end?
Yes. Are you not hearing anything?
I got a little bit from Dr. Clayton there at the start, but I haven't been able to pick up the rest. I don't know if
Uh-oh.
you may need to turn the volume
Oh,
up
okay.
and
Well, I've
up.
got it. Yep, I've got it up as loud as I can on my side. Let me see. Well, let me adjust it some more down here, maybe. Sorry about that. I thought it was working. Let's see if we try this again. Let me know if you can't hear something.
Yeah, still a little hard to hear. Um, if you want to try and switch, I will share it from my end, and we
Oh,
can see if it works a little better.
okay. Absolutely. Sorry about that.
No, that's all right. We will get it figured out here.
Yeah, it was pretty loud on my end, so
In the interim, while Cody pulls up this video and while we're waiting through this, Sam, why don't you talk to us a little bit about, while we're getting some of this, and it may come up here in the video in a little bit, uh, about different soil types maybe throughout the state and how that may affect, um, you know, stocking rate. It's not the same in every part of the state. Cody was super quick on the video. You may want to come back to that.
yeah, I can sure come back and address that. But yeah, we've got a lot of variation across the state, and certainly that's going to impact the type of forages that we plant, and certainly how they respond. But be happy to address that here momentarily.
All
See if
right.
we can get this working.
Let me know if you hear it.
we know that plant health is very important to our soil health. And if we don't have good plant and soil health, we know that we can't capture rainfall when we do finally get some. So in this result demonstration, we'll be looking at different measurements you can take on pastures to get an idea about how well your plants are established and what that means for rainfall infiltration, or how much water you actually get when we do finally receive that rainfall. You may have heard about take half, leave half. This is where you purposely leave at least half of your grass plant standing after you graze in order to keep healthy plant roots, which break up the ground and allow rainfall to infiltrate. It's also shading out the ground to create a much cooler temperature underneath. There's that stubble left that's going to provide really good cover for wildlife. Lots of benefits to leaving that 50% stubble. Now that's directly related to rainfall infiltration. We know that when we get 1 inch of rainfall, if our land has not been properly cared for, we're not going to see an inch of rainfall actually infiltrate into an area that our plants can use. And if it goes into that substrate moisture to prolong the plants, we know that we're going to subsist through that drought much better. So let's look at some ways that we can see how our plant and soil characteristics may influence rainfall infiltration. Our example ranch today is in Bexar County. They've been kind enough to let us come to their place and look at 3 different conditions of land that they have currently after a 2-year drought, to let us look at differences amongst their pastures and easy things that you can measure.
My name is Marilyn Magara, and my sister and I, Joan Salcedo, we operate the Back 40 Ranch. The ranch has been in the family since the early 1900s. Actually, the family settled here in the late 1890s. It's a long, skinny piece of property. It runs from the highway all the way down to the San Antonio River, which is a little over 3 miles long. So it's not very wide, but it sure is long. With such a long, skinny place, it's kind of hard to try to keep feed and everything for the animals up and growing, especially when we're hitting some of these droughts.
There are several ways that we can measure the plant and soil in these 3 different pastures to determine potential rainfall infiltration and overall health. First, we'll determine plant cover by using a meter square made of PVC in several representative locations in the pasture, recording how much of the frame is made up of grasses, forbs, litter, or bare ground. Next, we'll look at plant health by digging up and measuring the roots on some of the better forage grass plants from a representative area in the pasture. Root length determines how deep in the soil profile the plant can reach nutrients and those water resources. Soil moisture can be determined using a Lincoln soil moisture tool at 3 inches and 6 inches deep. The tool must be calibrated at full saturation, which would be a 10 on the scale, with that soil type before measurements are taken. Next, soil temperature can be measured a 1/4 inch below the soil surface using a soil thermometer. More plant coverage will usually keep the soil cooler, favoring microbes and water retention. Finally, water infiltration speed is compared between pastures by hammering a metal or PVC ring into the ground a couple of inches to hold the water. A known amount of water will be poured into the ring. We use 16 ounces, but use whatever makes sense for the size of your ring. Time how long it takes for all the water to fully infiltrate where no more water is sitting on the soil surface. Welcome to the Back 40 Ranch. We'll be performing all of the different measurement techniques covered in the methods for the sacrifice pasture, the moderately grazed pasture, and the lightly grazed pasture. We'll demonstrate each method and provide a summary of the results at the end of each section. First up, let's estimate ground cover in each of the 3 pastures using a 1 meter square frame, and we'll estimate the coverage of grasses, forbs, brush, litter, and bare ground. On the sacrifice pasture, where cattle have been parked for a long period of time eating hay, we only had 25% grass, 69.5% litter, and very little bare ground, forbs, or brush. The moderately grazed pasture fared a little bit better with 60% grass, 30% bare ground, and 10% litter. Finally, the lightly grazed pasture had 45% grass and almost equal amount of litter at 40%. There were no forbs or brush, and bare ground was only 15%. You can see in summary that the moderately and light grazed pastures maintain a much higher amount of grass coverage on the land, which makes for a lot better infiltration of that rainfall due to the root system breaking up the soil and helping that water to get back in. You can also see that on the lightly grazed pasture, we maintained a high percent of litter on the ground, which also can help to shade that open bare ground from sun, which might evaporate any water or moisture that does reach it. Each of these percentages were averaged from 4 different meter square frames that we laid across each of the 3 pastures. Next up, we'll be measuring our grass height with a measuring stick. This could help us to understand how well those grasses are able to slow down any rainfall and get them to go into the ground with their root health. The results are as we would expect. Our sacrifice pasture, where those animals have been parked for a period of time, only had 2 to 3 inches of grass height. Moderately grazed 6 to 8 inches, and the lightly grazed pasture still had 10 to 12 inches of grass height, meaning that they had a lot more plant material left above ground and probably very healthy roots below ground. Next, we use the soil moisture meter to determine our soil moisture at 3 inches and 6 inches deep. This will tell us how much water is available to plants after recent rainfalls.
We're in an exceptional drought here on the south end of Bexar County and here around Elmendorf, and we had about an inch of rain here 2 days ago. And that's the last substantial rain we got in this part of the state, or part of the county with early spring. And so we've been awfully dry, but you can tell we've got a pretty sandy loam type soil profile here, it feels like, and you can tell that as I kind of dug down here that there is some moisture.
In summary, our soil moisture meter measured a 2 in the lightly grazed and moderately grazed pastures at 6 inches deep, which means that they did capture a little bit of that 1 inch of rainfall that was recently received, whereas our sacrifice pasture did not seem to capture any of it. At a more shallow level, 3 inches deep, we did see a tiny bit of soil moisture for the sacrifice pasture at a 1, but maintain that level of 2 in the moderately and light grazed pastures. Next up, we'll look at measuring root depth and length. This is going to help us to understand those plant conditions, the health of the plant, the resilience of the grass, and the ability of that grass to be opening up that soil in order for rainfall to infiltrate properly.
At the top of my hand here would be the area of the grass that's kind of above the soil surface. So you've got some areas in here where we've got roots that are anywhere from 3 to 6 inches in length. Folks, we're in another pasture here out on the back 40, and it looks like we're in we call this kind of a moderately grazed pasture. We've got quite a bit more canopy height out here in this particular pasture. I've just pulled up a little cross section here, and so if we kind of take our measuring stick again and we look in terms of an area that has a little bit more top growth in it, a little bit better canopy height, and then we correlate that to the root system, I hope you can see that we've got some roots here that are in essence, you know, that longest one there is 15 inches, but I would say the balance of these are somewhere in that, you know, 8 to 10 inch length. So definitely, I think a correlation between the amount of grass that we've got on top of the ground and a much more extensive root system in this particular pasture. Okay, we've got an area here in a better pasture. I feel like looks like we've got a couple of bulls and a donkey in here at the moment, but we've got quite a bit more grass. You know, again, I mentioned earlier we had an inch rain here recently, here just a couple of days ago. You can already see things really starting to respond to that moisture. But if we kind of come and we take a look here, you know, we can see some roots. And I'd say most of these, again, are in that 5 to 7 inch range. But one thing that's interesting about this in particular is there just seems to be quite a bit more root system. They seem to be a little bit more concentrated. As you just kind of pull up this section here.
So in summary, our Bermuda grass pastures had very different root lengths depending on which pasture we were in. That poor sacrifice pasture where the cattle had been for some time had only 3 to 6 inch roots, whereas our lightly grazed pasture had 5 to 7 inches, but much more bulk or more amount of roots visible. And our moderately grazed pasture had 8 to 10 inches for their root system. So they're going to be able to reach much more nutrients and soil moisture for the long term than our sacrifice pasture. Next, we're going to measure the soil temperature just a 1/4 inch below the soil surface. These temperatures did not vary wildly between the sacrificed moderately grazed or lightly grazed pastures, anywhere from 88 degrees underneath that thick thatch of litter in the sacrificed pasture to 92 or 90 degrees in the moderately grazed and light grazed pastures. But note that where we measured bare ground, it averaged about 101 degrees Fahrenheit. So we know that that is a really, really high temperature that might have some effect on our microbial activity in the soils and be a direct link between being able to get more plants established there in the future where we've got that bare ground. And now we're going to measure infiltration rate directly. Remember, that's where we're going to put a ring into the soil. We're going to pour a known amount of water in there and time how fast it takes for that water to soak into the soil. When we have healthier soils, water should infiltrate faster, indicating better soil structure and porosity. In contrast, slower infiltration rates in other pastures may suggest compacted or degraded soil.
Okay, we've got our container here. We've got 16 ounces of water. And I'm going to go ahead and measure the amount of time it's going to take for this water to go ahead and infiltrate into the soil profile. And our intent is to drive this container down deep enough in the ground where we don't have any water leaking out the side of it. And so I don't see any water leaking out the side, but you can notice that there's still quite a bit of water standing on top of the soil surface here. So we'll give it some time to see how long it'll take for it all to infiltrate into the ground. All right, so we've got another 16 ounces of water. And we're going to pour it in here. We've got this canister kind of tapped into the ground here, about a half to an inch to an inch or so in the ground. What we're going to do is I'm going to time the amount of time that it takes for this 16 ounces of water to infiltrate into the soil profile. So we're going to go ahead and start our clock. And we're just going to put this water in here. And the reason we tap this container in the ground is we don't want any water leaking out of the perimeter of it, but we want to illustrate, and if you can see on film, you'll notice that the water is really going into the ground at a much faster pace than what we saw at the previous site, where there really wasn't much grass. And I think a lot of that had to do with just that sacrifice area where they've been picking cattle. There was some compaction going on, and probably a number of issues. A lot more litter in that area, and that maybe slowed some of that infiltration rate. But we're approaching a minute right now, and as you can tell, I can see, at least from my angle, that water has gone down pretty substantial, a relatively short amount of time. So the thought is that maybe with a little bit more grass cover and a little bit more canopy height out here, we can do a little bit better job of capturing some water and catching some water get a rainfall. We've got a random site here selected. We're going to go ahead and put our 16 ounces of water in here and see how long it takes for it to go ahead and infiltrate into the profile.
In summary, though it was hard to see that water level in the film, we did notice that there was a significant difference between the amount of time that it takes for rainfall to infiltrate in that sacrificed pasture versus the moderately or lightly grazed pasture. So you can see that there was almost 4 minutes for sacrificed pasture and about 1.5 minutes for the lightly grazed pasture. What this means is that when we get rainfall, some of these pastures are going to be able to soak in that water much more quickly without allowing it to run off. And others are going to struggle to keep any of that soil moisture retained, which we did see when we measured that soil moisture at 6 inches and 3 inches. Just not a lot of retention there in that sacrificed pasture. And that's likely why it's just running off of that land and we're not capturing it. We want to stage our properties to make sure that we're capturing that rainfall when we do finally get it.
Well, as we wrap things up today, I just want to share a couple of key points. First being that our lightly grazed pasture had the most grass canopy height at 10 to 12 inches. It also really had a very dense and healthy root system, which really supports water infiltration. In essence, our findings really support other extension studies and research work that's been done that shows that grass stubble has a direct correlation to a higher infiltration rate and plant growth. Yes, the second point that I would like to share would be that our sacrificed pasture had very little standing forage. We had quite a bit of litter and some forbs in there, and it took the longest water infiltration time. I want you to think about if we happen to have had a really hard rain. Most of that water would have never made it into the soil profile. Most of that would have run off and taken a lot of soil with it. So when we get into these areas where we don't have a lot of grass and we have a lot of compaction, just understand that you may get an inch rain or a 2-inch rain, but the amount of that is going into the soil profile is a very small percentage of that. So the take-home message in essence would be that by practicing good land stewardship and pasture management principles, and by not overgrazing your pastures, you can capture more water and grasses will respond quite a bit faster once you receive a rainfall event. All right.
Sam, I'll pass it back over to you and stop sharing for a second while I get this next video pulled up, and you can let me know when you're ready for it.
Perfect. Thank you, Cody. Yeah, so hopefully, folks, that painted a decent picture just to talk a little bit about the importance of leaving some grass stubble and the importance of managing your pastures correctly. Cody, I'm going to have him pull up this second video here momentarily. This second one that we've got is somewhat similar. I think both these videos are are pretty closely related. This second one, when Cody was doing his introduction, he mentioned that we'd had a program a couple of years ago at the Beef Cattle Short Course. And this second video was really a result of that. And it mainly looks at stocking rates and animal performance and economics. It's actually a comparison of two ranches. They're not in Bexar County. They're northeast of us in Caldwell County. But years ago, a couple of years ago, our local Ag and Natural Resource Committee came up with the idea, and it more or less developed into an initiative that we call Ranching in a New Climate. And the presentation at the short course was several hours in length. There were several components to that. This video that we did is just a kind of a subset of that. But it's interesting in that the cooperator on this video was actually a former county agent and a real good friend of mine, Dennis Hale, and several of y'all may know Dennis. But I like this video because it really tells a story and it kind of talks about some of the challenges that he's had with his operation and a lot of the practices that he's implemented and put in place, and a lot of the improvement that's been made. And then there toward the end of it, we've got a lot of pictures that kind of show some pretty stark differences between the two operations. So with that, Cody, if you want to pull up that second video and we'll go ahead and show it. And then again, I'd be happy to address any questions at the conclusion. What I've been noticing here around Bexar County, and it's been going on for a long time, that our pastures really as a whole are overgrazed. We've been in a severe drought for a couple of years now, and what little rainfall we've been receiving really hasn't been enough to do us a whole lot of good. Producers that have cattle still, a lot of those cows are still in really poor body condition. They're relying a lot on purchased feed. And I'm also seeing that a lot of producers really don't have a good handle on what they're spending, what it's costing them. I think that one of the challenges a lot of folks are dealing with is they feel like the more cows that they have on a piece of property, the more money they're going to make, which maybe necessarily always isn't the case. And the other challenge that many of them have
And it's unfortunate, but many of them think they need to continue to keep cows on their property for tax purposes. So our purpose of this result demonstration was really to look at grazing management, animal health, and just overall productivity and see how that affects economic return. And so we looked at two operations. One of them we'll refer to as the forage ranch. One we'll refer to as the feeding ranch. The forage ranch, in essence, had a much more conservative stocking rate. Their pastures were in better shape, and they actually had a significantly lower feed bill. And then we looked at the feeding ranch, which, on the contrary, they had about double the stocking rate that the forage ranch had. They relied significantly more on purchased feed, and they had very minimal animal health program.
We ranch in Caldwell County in Lockhart, Texas. My mom and dad purchased that ranch 61 years ago, and they've been ranching on the cow-calf operation ever since. When my dad passed away, it'll be 7 years this February that I took over, but the study was done about 5.5 years after he passed away. And as Sam had said earlier, the pastures were overgrazed, they were overstocked, brush was starting to encroach in, and weeds were starting to encroach in. And so we saw range conditions going down, and we saw cattle conditions going down, weaning weights going down from what little records we had that had been kept. And when I took over, I basically sat down with my mom and just said, Mom, we cannot continue to operate this way, losing this kind of money. It's just not feasible. So many of these people at the ranch, it's their second job. And I mean, they have a job, so it's a hobby. But I always say, when a hobby loses so much money and you keep doing it, that becomes an addiction. And do you want to keep with the addiction, or do you want to try to get out of the addiction? And I decided we had to get out of the addiction and do something different. When these ranches were purchased, my dad and his best friend that worked at the DPS together could not afford the entire 550-acre ranch. So they decided to go together and basically split the ranch, and each one buy half of it because they could afford that. And so basically each ranch is around 275 acres. We looked on our ranch, and we helped the feeding ranch, and basically took out brush, pens, houses, hay traps, and said about 240 grazable acres. On the ranch, they actually sprigged the coastal at the same time to save cost. And so when they sprigged, the feeding ranch put out 100 acres of coastal, and my dad put out 50 acres of coastal and 50 acres of climb to just kind of diversify the grazing. And so all of that was done at the same time. My dad decided he needed to pay for the ranch, and the way to pay for the ranch in his mind was to have more cows. And so he stopped at 90 head on that, and he thought the more cows he had, the more calves he had, the more calves he could sell, the better he could pay the land payment tax. The other gentleman thought around 60 was about right, and so he put 60 in, thinking that number was better for the overall ranch. So it actually started out where our ranch was more the feeding ranch, and theirs was a little more the forage ranch.
This pisses me off. They strip table salt down to 2 minerals, call it healthy, and then wonder.
When I took over, we had over 90 cows of basically a gray Brangus, I call them. They were Brangus influenced cattle. They were not registered Brangus. They were Brangus influenced cattle with Angus bulls on them. And that's a 1 to 3 stocking rate, which in my opinion was just not feasible and not sustainable. And the pasture showed it. I visited with my mom, who owns the ranch, and I convinced her to go down to 30 cows, which is a 1 to 8 stocking rate. And using the data, we thought we could go a little higher than that, but we cut it down to about 80%. We're dealing with damaged range that has been overgrazed for 50 plus years. And so we wanted to be kind of on the conservative side. Most of our cows are weighing probably around 1,300 pounds. I think most producers underestimate the size of their cattle. They think they weigh 1,000, 11. We weighed a few of ours that we culled, and they were weighing around 1,300 pounds. We had no production records. My dad was one of these that just ran the cows out there and gathered the calves. So we had to do all our selection on basically phenotype. We looked at structure, disposition, udder, those types of things that had to do our selection on, because we had no records to look at. The feeding ranch sold their beef masters and said, hey, can we buy some of your cows? We like the Brangus cross. Well, we were more than happy to sell them to them. And it made it nice for this little demonstration we did, because you can't take genetics into the deal. They're saying genetics. When they made their stocking, they did not look at themselves as a feeding ranch. They looked at themselves as, we think this is about the right stocking rate, and then we'll just supplement what we need to. And I think a lot of producers do that where they really don't know what the correct stocking rate is.
I guess what's interesting to note as well is that on Dennis's property on the Forge Ranch, they just had one bull with their 30 cows. That was an Angus, registered Angus bull. And his neighbor ran 2 Simmental cross bulls for the 60 head that they had. Neither operation really ever pulled the bulls from the cows. They just ran the bulls with them year round. And the main reason for that was because they just didn't have a place to keep the bulls separated from the regular cow herd. Just want to mention that many times, as many of you probably are already aware, management practice on a property can influence how much grass or how much forage you can grow. But in the example, the general land management applications were in essence the same.
When we started land management practices and I took over, we're good friends with the landowner that we're working with, and they don't have a lot of equipment. We have a boom sprayer and those types of things. So we made a deal with them where when we were spraying, he figured that was kind of the right time. He thought it should be sprayed. Would we mind spraying his place? So we put the fertilizer out at the same time when I'm putting the fertilizer out, and we put the weed spray out at the same time. The feeding ranch wanted some help with his cattle. They do have a gentleman that helps on the ranch, but they needed some help on just keeping records and tagging some cattle. Again, I told you, none of these cattle were identified. So on both ranches, cows were tagged, and calves are now tagged within the first week of their life. So we can match the cow to the calf. We keep some basic information that we put on a spreadsheet, and I keep some basic information on his and use the same spreadsheet. And the way we do that is so that I also know when these cattle were born, because we haul all the calves to the auction barn. We typically wean around 7 months of age, and by knowing the ages on ours and then knowing the ages on his, we can help correlate the marketing of these to where they're marketed at the right time, not just whenever we feel like they're ready. When we started designing the supplementation program, we decided what we were going to use. We went to the 26% Q because at that time of the study, they were $11.85 a bag, which came out to 91 cents per pound of protein. The 20% Q came out to $1.05 per pound of protein. So it's a no-brainer, use the 26% Q. It's a better deal. And a lot of producers just look at the price of the bags of Qs and go, well, that one's cheaper. It's the price per pound of protein that makes the difference. And then we test all of our hay. That hay for this study was 11% crude protein and 60% TDN. And we core sample all of our hay. If I get, say, 50 bales, I'm going to core sample 30 of them, mix it up, send it to the lab, and find out. Because if you don't have your hay sample, you're just guessing at what your supplement program should be. Our hay checked out at $1.14 per pound of protein. I want to feed as little hay as possible because it is the most expensive per pound of protein of any of the feeds out there. So I want to feed as little possible, utilize that standing forage as much as possible. And then the final thing we do is we keep a mineral tub out year round. The other ranch does not put out mineral. They eat about 4 ounces a day. It comes out to about $1,500 annually, which is $48 a head, which sounds like a lot, but mineral programs are so important on reproductive issues and that type of thing.
The notable difference between the forage ranch and the feeding ranch was really two faceted. Number one was the amount of time that they were feeding, and two, the volume of which they were feeding. When you think about the range cubes, the forage ranch fed 1 to no more than 2 pounds per head per day for about 110 days, while the neighbor fed anywhere between 5 and 6 pounds of range cubes per head per day for 125, 130 days. Forage ranch typically fed anywhere from 10 to 15 pounds of hay per head per day for about 90 days, whereas his neighbor was feeding 30 to 40 pounds per head per day for anywhere from 150 to 180 days. As you kind of think about this, the forage ranch would be feeding in essence about 1.5 bales per cow per year, whereas the feeding ranch would be 4.5 bales of hay per cow per year. If you kind of put some numbers to that, you would estimate that the feeding ranch is in essence got about another $400 per head annually.
This video was created by AI. No expensive cameras or
in terms of just hay cost alone.
One thing I felt like that was very important when we took over the ranch was to have a good herd health program. I encourage all producers to get with their vets and organize a good herd health program. I remember during one time on the ranch, we lost 6 head calves due to blackleg because my dad had no vaccination program. And those calves were valued at that point at $1,000 a head. So that's $6,000 we lost. We're going to show you the numbers in a minute, but we estimated that would pay between 8 to 10 years of the entire herd health program just off those calves we lost on that one outbreak. So that's why our herd health program is so important. We work our cows twice a year. We usually work in the spring and the fall. In the spring, we vaccinate with an 8-way. I don't care what product you use. We've just been using an UltraVac 8. And then we use a respiratory product. We use the Virus Shield 6 plus BL5-HB. We definitely want to make sure that there's lepto in your vaccine, because if you have wild hogs, which most people do, and if they share a water source with a cattle, you can have a lepto outbreak. And if you have a leptospirosis outbreak, you're going to have a very poor reproduction that year. So we do vaccinate with that. We deworm in the spring, and then we will put insecticide ear tags in, and we do rotate those with different chemistries. We then come back in the fall. We cut the ear tags out. We vaccinate again with an 8-way, like UltraVac 8, and again, a respiratory product. We also put a pour on for lice control. Our health cost came to about $28 a cow, which is about $875 to $900 a year. That did include a breed soundness exam on the bull. Now, our calves, a lot of producers will say you don't need to do any work to the calves until after they're weaned. We've shown with that death loss, that's not the case. Our bull calves, when they're tagged that first week of life, we band them and we give them a tetanus shot. We come back about 3 weeks later and give them a second tetanus shot. Our calves are all worked at 3 months of age. We give them an 8-way, the Virus Shield, which is respiratory. We deworm them. We come back a month later, which is the most important part of it. The booster, they've shown that the first vaccine gives about a 10% control. The second one, the booster, jumps it up to about 90 to 95% control. We come back 30 days, we give them a second 8-way and a respiratory. We also use a Synovex C implant in both heifers and steer calves because of the extra weight gain. That comes out to about $500 a year or so, about $17 a calf.
During this project, Dennis's neighbor really wasn't doing any kind of herd health program on his mature cow herd. What he was doing for the bull and heifer calves was he was giving them 1 shot of the blackleg 8-way. He was using 1 injection of UltraVac 8. Unfortunately, though, he wasn't given a booster, so the efficacy of that initial shot was pretty minimal. Additionally, his neighbor didn't castrate any of the bull calves, didn't implant any of those calves either. So they had a pretty minimal health program, which equated to about $1 per head or $49 annually. The total economic breakdown between the 2 operations was really interesting. Dennis had 30 cows. In 2023, he marketed 30 calves, which is outstanding. 100% calf crop. That doesn't always happen annually, but very thankful for when it does. His steers and heifers average 590 pounds, and they typically try to wean at about 7 months of age, but due to the drought, he did end up weaning a few calves a little bit earlier than 7 months of age. I would say that although a 590-pound weaning weight is certainly acceptable and it sounds good in a normal year where you might receive 30 to 35 inches annual rainfall, the likelihood is that weaning weight would have been quite a bit higher than 590 pounds. So overall, he produced 17,700 pounds of beef on 240 grazable acres, which equivalates to 74 pounds of beef per acre. His neighbor, on the other hand, had 60 cows, so he had to double the stocking rate at cow to 4 acres. He had an 82% calf crop and was able to market 49 calves in 2023. And you may ask, well, my goodness, why did he only have an 82% calf crop? The reality there is that his cows were in a little poor body condition. And so the likelihood is that a lot of those cows weren't able to breed back, 3 months into lactation. So as a result, they're not going to calve in a 12-month calendar year. So a lot of those cows didn't calve until perhaps 14, 16, 18 months later. And so in essence, he didn't have a marketable calf to sell in that calendar year. His weaning weights on those calves were about 400 pounds on average, just shy of 200 pounds lighter than the calves that were marketed off of the forage ranch. The feeding ranch ended up producing 19,600 pounds of beef on 240 acres, or 81 pounds of beef per acre. If you look at that math, it's interesting to note that actually the feeding ranch produced about 2,000 pounds more than what the forage ranch marketed, but that's not really quite the end of the story. The 30 calves that Dennis sold on the forage ranch, those calves brought $2.19 a pound, returning about $1,293 per head. And that equivalates to a total of just shy of $39,000. His cow cost, so just to keep the cow around, was a little over $1,000. And that included things like his feed cost, which is obviously the biggest one, health expenses, insurance, taxes, depreciation, those types of things is kind of what calculates into that annual cost to keep the cow around. So in all, he made $7,890 that year off of his cattle operation. His neighbor, on the other hand, sold 49 calves. They actually brought more per pound. They sold for $2.50 a pound. Part of the reason was because they were quite a bit lighter. So those lighter weight calves are going to typically bring a little bit more per pound. And his neighbor received about $1,000 per head. So his total income on 49 marketable calves equivalated to $49,000. His cow costs were just slightly higher, about $70 higher than Dennis's cow cost at $1,100 per head, but he had more of them, right? Dennis had 30 cows, his neighbor had 60. So when you add up his total expenses and you look at what he brought in income-wise and what his expenses were, his neighbor actually lost $17,600 that year on his operation.
This is the reason why I've canceled my internet service provider subscription. This brand new portable Wi-Fi router.
One thing I've got to say is you've got to keep records. We had a theory, and the theory was we could run less cows, make more money, and keep our range condition sustainable, where it wasn't just graze to the dirt all the time. But without records, you just don't know that. But what we found is by our records, we did find that we actually made more money off really 2/3 less cattle. Our range condition went up substantially, and we were able to feed those cows less. Body condition scores went up. When we started the demonstration, the body condition scores on our cows were in 3s, and they're now in the 5s, even up to 6. And by feeding less and by having more forage out there, we can cut back on the amount of hay that we feed, which is expensive, and better utilize our pastures. But at the same time, those pastures are sustainable, that when we get a rainfall, they respond to it because there's a grass cover out there and we're not getting a bunch of weeds growing after we get a 2-inch rain. And what I've learned is this, and we always stress this to everybody we ever talk to. Everybody are forage growers. You grow forage, and then you decide how to utilize that forage. And we decided to use beef cattle. Some people may use hay. Some people may use goats, whatever. We decided we're going to grow forage, and we're going to use cattle to harvest that forage. And I want to use as much of that forage as efficiently as I can to keep my feeding costs down and keep my pastures sustainable.
Dennis's neighbor took a look at the records that Dennis had over in 23 at the end of the year, and kind of had a couple of ideas of what he wanted to do moving forward. And one of the things he thought about doing initially was, he said, well, I'm going to just go ahead and reduce my numbers from 60 head of cows to 40 head of cows, and I'm going to implement a health program. Then I think after he kind of really evaluated and thought about it a little bit more, he realized that it took Dennis a little over 5 years to make the progress that he had made, from starting with a pasture that was really overgrazed, significantly overgrazed, to where he is now with his cows in much better body condition and his forage situation much better. And as a result of thinking about that, his neighbors kind of decided that, look, I don't know that I want to wait 6-7 years for my pastures to be able to recover. I think the best thing for me maybe to do is just be to completely destock. And so that's what he's elected to do. He has sold all of his cows. He worked with his local chief appraiser, which is really important. And in visiting with him, was going to have no penalties by destocking. And his chief appraiser said, you can have 2 years. to remove the cows and let your pastures have a chance to recover. And so that's in essence what he's elected to do. He's indicated that when he does get ready to restock and he does want to get back in the cattle business, that he will be implementing a herd health program, and he's also going to reduce his stocking rate.
Okay, we've thrown a lot at you information-wise on this video, but the main thing to remember, my main goal when my father passed away and I took over the ranch was to improve cattle production, to improve individual animal performance, but at the same time, improve pasture production and pasture quality. And we've come a long way. And I think my father will be proud of what we've done so far. I know my mom really enjoys the ranch, really likes the financial aspect of how it's doing. But we still got a long way to go. And my ultimate goal is to make this ranch sustainable and profitable so that future generations can afford to run the ranch, but enjoy it at the same time.
Sam, back to you.
All right. So anyway, that was just kind of a quick synopsis on that Ranching in a New Climate initiative, and hopefully that gave you an idea of a situation where you can have an idea and you can be proactive and put in some management practices and take some little different approaches and be able to turn a situation around. I can't tell you how many times over the years that I've visited with people that feel like, the more cows they're going to have, the more money that they're potentially going to make. And a lot of times, that's not always necessarily the case. In many instances, not every year do those cows actually make money, especially given that example there with the feeding ranch where they were in pretty poor body condition and you didn't have a marketable calf to sell during that year. So hopefully that's just another example of a success story and things that you can do and implement on your place that maybe can help you make some improvements. So I'd be willing to answer any questions that anybody might have at this time.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions based on what we've seen so far, feel free to drop those in the Q&A box. One question that we have received is, are the videos available on YouTube to watch again? I think I can answer that, Sam.
Yeah.
Yes, they are. And anybody that would like those videos, you can email us. It's just education@tscra.org. I will drop that in the chat box. Anybody that would like those videos, just shoot us an email and we can circulate those out. Okay, we've got another question here. It says, twice a year, I chop up a lick block of dewormer and dump it into a protein lick tub, and my cows seem to eat it. Is this an okay way to use dewormer?
Yeah, so I think there's mixed feelings on that. The biggest challenge is consumption and are they consuming enough? I think most, and certainly I'm not a veterinarian, but I would say that in more instances than none, if you could actually have a little bit probably more confidence if you could actually get a product in their system, so maybe an injectable or some kind of an oral drench where that they're getting the appropriate dose would probably be ideal. Some folks like to use the pour-ons. The other thing that we're seeing now with deworming strategies in many instances is folks are collecting fecal samples, and they're collecting those samples and they're getting them into a lab, and trying to determine, maybe a strategic deworming approach as opposed to just where we're going to do it in the spring and in a fall type scenario.
Great. Well, does anybody else have any other questions? Cody made a great point. I went ahead and dropped those videos in rather than y'all having to ask for the videos. They're going in the chat box, so you can grab those videos there. Any other questions y'all can think of, drop them in the Q&A box. Looks like another question. Would you have concern with bloat if you used old hay?
I think you can absolutely. If depending on what else the cattle have got available to be consuming. If you've got old and hay that's molded, the best thing to do would be not to be feeding it if you didn't have to. If you had to feed some of it, just make sure that there's something else for those cattle to be consuming. You don't want that to be making up a big part of their diet. Most dry cows are going to consume, 26 pounds or thereabouts of dry forage daily. And so if you've got a situation where your pastures are grazed down pretty short and you're putting out, hay like that, you can definitely run into problems. And, what we generally try to suggest to folks is, the one investment that you can have on a piece of property that will pay for itself is a hay barn. And even if you've got round bales, there's kind of some right and wrong approaches perhaps to how to store those. But if you have the flexibility of putting them up underneath a barn, that's one of the investments that will really pay for itself time and time again. And then, certainly from a nutrition standpoint, trying to collect a forage sample on your hay so you know what what you're feeding. A lot of hay, especially during drought years, there's a lot of hay being marketed, and there's a lot of hay being rolled up on the side of farm to market roads, and it's being marketed as good quality, and it's KR blue stem or whatever the case might be. And so, the only real way to know about the nutritional content of that forage is to have it tested.
Well, I think this was mentioned in the videos too, Sam, but anybody who is interested in testing their hay, reach out to your local extension office. If you don't know who they are, it's great to establish a relationship now. Any local extension office can help you with a hay test, right?
You bet. Yeah. Most offices, most of the time we're going to run those samples through the soil, water, and forage testing lab at Texas A&M and just run just a regular analysis and just test for crude protein and TDN, but you can also test for other things. And like in Bexar County, I've got hay probes, and I've got some equipment that we can even loan out to help folks in accomplishing that. So, yep, happy to help you.
Great. Cody, any other questions on your end?
We did just have one pop up. It said, any recommendation on herbicide with loamy clay soils?
Yeah, lots of options now in terms of herbicide recommendations. Years ago we used to have you just almost used to have a pesticide applicator's license to be able to purchase and apply a lot of products. We got a lot of products now that you don't have to have a license. I wouldn't be as concerned about the soil profile in particular as I would be the weed species that you've got there. And if you're just trying to control weeds or trying to control brush, but like in the example that we had that we just showed of the feeding ranch and the forage ranch, they used 1.5 pints of Grazon P plus D, and they use that annually. Grazon P plus D is good. A lot of folks use Grazon Next. We've got some new products out in the market like Duracore and, Chaparral. There's just a slew of really good broadleaf weed herbicides out there. And a lot of those products, got a selectivity of 100 plus weed species. So I would say the biggest thing would be to, work with somebody, whether it's your county agent or whether it's a district conservationist with NRCS that can kind of help you identify maybe what some of your target weeds are. And then that might help you a little bit more in terms of maybe tailoring a specific herbicide application to be the most effective on those particular weed species.
Yeah, it looks like he added a little bit more just to say the Husach and Blue Stem is native and overpowering is NK37 planting.
Yeah, so you've got some herbicides out there that are grass, type herbicides that have some application on KR blue stem. Weesach is going to be a brush species, so you're going to be looking at some other products. Grazon P plus D works pretty well on that for a foliar application. Some folks are using Sendero. If you've got plants that maybe haven't been disturbed, that maybe get a little bit bigger in terms of size that you can't get over the top with a boom, you can come in with a basal application and use something like Remedy and Diesel, 25% Remedy, 75% Diesel mixture, and use that as a basal treatment. And that really works well on a lot of brush species. And then what a lot of folks do too, if you want to just get the plant out of the pasture, and you don't want to look, once that plant defoliates and you don't want to see a dead plant out there, a lot of folks will just use a cut stump application, where they'll go in right above the soil surface and they'll remove that plant, and then you'll need to spray that cut surface. If you don't spray that cut surface, then a lot of those plants are resprouters and they'll end up coming right back. And instead of being a single stem plant, you'll come back with one that will be multi-stemmed and a little bit more of a challenge to control.
One more question here, and we'll be sure to let you go. We don't want to hold you over your time here, Sam. But
Sure.
any recommendations for desert termite control?
Mo, I wish I had a good one. I really do. We do not have a good recommendation through the Extension Service for desert termite control. We don't. There's really not a Lambda Size, a product that's been touted a little bit, that people have had a little experimented with, but it's not labeled for pasture use. And for years, the thought was to go in and maybe take a harrow and kind of till up the top portion of that soil profile and knock down some of those tunnels. But I think more research is being done that's showing that that's probably not the most effective, option either. And so, we don't have a real good recommendation, unfortunately. Now, there are some insecticides that have a little efficacy on desert termites, but the reality is on a pasture situation, it's going to be pretty short-lived. And we've run into a lot of problems with desert termites, especially, and really I attribute a lot of it to the drought, to be honest with you. We've got a lot of situations where we've lost a lot of our forage stands, and those things have really come in and populated. And I think if we can get in a situation where we can start getting some moisture, and we can break this drought cycle a little bit, and then probably our best bet's going to actually be eventually to try to go in there and maybe reseed some of those areas. I'll just share this real quick. I was at a meeting yesterday with our emergency management personnel, our disaster district emergency operations center. We had a big district meeting in San Antonio yesterday, and one of the presenters we had was a meteorologist, and he kind of gave a weather outlook. And I hate to share some bad news with you to hear toward the end of the webinar, but I think it's important for you to know. So he was talking about kind of what we can expect moving forward, and it didn't really sound very good. We're in a La Nina weather pattern, so we're drier than normal and warmer temperatures certainly than normal. And I asked him, I said, well, is there any indication on when the drought, may end up breaking? And he said, well, Sam, it's all going to depend on what happens in April of 26. He said, if we get some rain, there's hope that maybe things will start to improve. But he said the reality is if we don't get substantial rain in April of 26, the drought will very likely not break until the fall of 26 or the spring of 27. And so, I think as you start thinking about that and knowing that we're in dry times more than we are wet years, it really makes these conversations about managing your resources and taking care of your forage and those kind of things that much more important.
If you've got time, one more quick question.
Yeah.
If not, I understand. But are dung beetles seasonal? They're starting to see a few now.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we've seen a few of them around these parts, this part of the state, and certainly in our county. So, yeah, nothing out of the ordinary there.
Yes, sir. Well, we sure appreciate you being on and sharing this information with us, Sam. Really good stuff, and certainly, if you're getting started or been in the ranching industry for a while, AgriLife serves as a really great resource. Sam, Dr. Clayton, many of those others can be very valuable in what you're looking to do in providing a good input. And so, we appreciate your time on here.
Yeah, no, you bet. Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for being on, and we'll see you at our next Ranching 101.